welcome to the Elephant Podcast. My name is Patrick Kadara and I'm a curator at the Elephant.info. Today we're joined by Wandia Njoya, who is a senior lecturer and a blogger and quite outspoken on matters of education here in Kenya. They will be looking at the education sector, asking whether the reforms that are currently being implemented are working or whether they can work, and whether we're actually tackling the issues that are bedeviling the sector. I think the first question would be, so how did we end up in this situation? At independence, we were quite clear that we had our three main issues, which were poverty, ignorance, and disease. Lots of those were to be tackled through education. So how do we end up from a place where we thought we had a confluence of agreement on what education would be, to here where we have different objectives for different interests?
I think first of all we need to problematize the ignorance part, because I don't think Kenyans were really that ignorant. So why did we make that assumption at independence? We already had a history and a legacy and culture, and I think the thing we should have done was to see how can we build on our accomplishments so far as Africans and have an education system that reflects who we are as a people and the experiences we've had together. So that was one problem. The next one was just a philosophical problem. We never questioned what the education system was for before. And under the colonial system, education was for compliance, was for forcing compliance and controlling minds and skills. So we didn't change that. It's only that now we rephrased it as we are training for jobs and national development. But the underlying logic of control hasn't changed. Up to today, it has not changed. So that's how we have all these, parents say one thing, and they think, and the government officials repeat it, and we think that we are saying the same thing, but we are not saying the same thing.
They're using the same words, but
they mean different things. Because for politicians, when they're saying, yes, we want children to go to school, what they are saying is it's a good way to control children because we'll be determining what they learn. It's also a way of blackmailing parents because we'll tell them, accept my policy so that your children don't have to pay school fees. But the parents are hearing, oh, my child will grow up into a good adult, they'll get a good job. So we are talking at cross purposes, and it's very difficult to get people to see that politicians are talking a different language from us.
I think it's important to kind of lay the foundation. By looking back at the colonial era, you said education was used as a means of control. Can you just expound on how that was done?
There were several things. First of all, it was the economic control. You want to run the economy and you need to train people who are going to work in that system. And when Africans were being educated, it was only for the menial jobs and maybe the clerical ones. They were never meant to be in decision-making positions. Right. So that's the way in which they are controlling an African's ability to rise through the economy by saying you can only get education up to this level. But also it was a means of controlling ideas, because in fact they said that Africans didn't need to learn African history and African art because it would give them unnecessary ideas about freedom. So you want to control their minds and make them subservient, and that was why the missionaries were allowed so much leeway in the education system, because the colonial government said, we need the skills, but we don't want these ideas to revolutionize Kenyans. And so the job of the missionaries was to make us subservient, good workers. So it's economic and mind control. Right. It's a way of saying your ideas are not valid unless you have passed through this system.
Right. You're talking earlier about the independent schools and how exams were brought in essence, to try and control who got what opportunities or who was certified. Could you expand a little bit on that? So that was interesting.
Yeah, because independent schools, you could not control what was being taught in the classroom. And so the way to control the curriculum and the teaching is by introducing exams. And that applies also now for the colonial schools, because you could have a teacher who is being paid, of course, by the missionaries, but when they get into the classroom, they'll start telling you, do you know about your ancestors? Do you know this? Have you done this? So the way to control the curriculum and what goes on in the classroom is by giving exams. And that one, it works that way because the students and the parents are now the ones who are saying, what you're telling me is good, but is it going to come in the exam? Which is the same thing that happens up to today. You have things that you want to teach, but you can't teach because the students want to know if it's coming in the exam. So that's how the colonial government now introduced the Cambridge exam. And the Cambridge was run from London.
Right.
They weren't set here. It was London. So it was a way of saying, it doesn't matter what you're taught in whatever African school, you, at the end of the day, you will be certified by one system. And the Cambridge exams were still being given in Kenya 2 years into independence, until now Kenya decided to create its own exam body. So basically the idea is that government is the one that certifies what knowledge shall be learned and what knowledge it finds useful.
Yes, and that's interesting because coming to what's happening now, which you mentioned, that there's quite a lot of focus at the moment on passing the exam. And as you articulated, there are people who will insist, that learning should really be about getting what you need to pass the exam. So it's important for us, I think, to understand the colonial roots of these sorts of thinking. Do you think that we have reformed the system that we have from the colonial days, or is it a continuation of the colonial thinking and logic?
It's a continuation. I think the exam is a perfect example where you insist on certification according to a certain standard. So it's the same idea. It's about certifying and saying these are the ideas that are valid. But also and this is a conversation we've had on social media a lot, there's a lot of violence in the schools. Kids are beaten for not getting their multiplication tables. They are beaten for thinking on their own. One student was telling me she was punished for reading novels. You'd think that would be a good thing, that somebody's reading novels on their own, but she was punished for that by the teachers. So there's a lot of violence, even before we even start talking about the violence that the students now use when they're trying to negotiate and the teachers are not listening. So there's a lot of violence in the school system. If it's not physical, it's abuse and putting people down. So by the time you're finished with school, you have such a low self-esteem. And that is the point, so that when you become a citizen, you're a citizen who does whatever the government tells you. So it's still a very colonial system, a system of saying only these ideas are approved and only I can transmit them to you because I was given permission by the government. So even all this regulation that you have of universities is the same thing, is to say we are the ones who tell lecturers what they must teach, and we must always keep on inspecting to see that they are teaching the right thing. So it's still a very colonial system in operation.
I would assume some of the comeback that you get, and I'm sure you face these questions on social media, would be, do we not need to certify exams? Do people not, don't we need to have exams that are set that test whether people have learned? And don't we need to have some form of regulation that says this is the curriculum and this is what people need to know, so that we don't just have any Tom, Dick and Harry setting up a school and then saying that I'm teaching something. Are you fundamentally against the regulation and exams, or are you saying we're doing them badly?
I'm saying we are doing them badly because, for example, exams should be diversified. We have a pipeline. What we have now is a pipeline: KCSE, KCPE, KCSE, degree, like that, and there's no other way around it, and you have to wait for the government to announce which exams are available and all that. And if you don't follow it, at some point, for example, Matiani was saying, if you got a D and you ended up in university, they would nullify your degree. So it's a pipeline. Instead of introducing different forms of certification, for example, why can't we have certification for apprenticeships, for example? Like France, they have what they call, they have a certification for craftspeople. So like chefs, metal workers, designers, they get this certification and it's very prestigious. And the benefit is that now if you're a young person who is training in that field, if you learn with them, that's a prestigious thing for you. So we are not diversifying the types of certification that we can give. The second problem with the regulation mindset is that it comes from an idea of you are already doing something wrong, let us find you out. It's not saying these are the guidelines, let's see how this can work. Let's look at the best practices, what are good things that people are already doing, how can we mainstream them? That's not the logic of regulation. The logic of regulation is that you're all doing something wrong and we are here to catch you and embarrass you. So what happens with that kind of mindset is that institutions start following the regulations instead of teaching. They're more worried about, have we followed the rules? If the government comes, will they, are they going to sanction us? So that becomes the focus instead of education.
I'm thinking about the colonial roots of the system we have. I'm wondering whether the role of government is outsized within our regulatory system. In the sense that if government is the one that determines what schools will teach by setting up a curriculum, for example, and setting the exam, how do we get around that? Should we be having schools setting their own exams? The sorts of certifications that you speak about, of chefs and artisans, apprenticeships, that sort of thing, should this be government certifications? Should it be trade certifications? What do you see as the role of government within education, and are we doing it wrongly?
I think, first of all, I remember I used to tell the members of the Commission for University Education, why don't you tell us what is happening out there and what we need to think about, instead of just coming to ask us which rules we have followed. So I think the government is supposed to, a proper government that cares for its people, is supposed to give guidelines, to say these are the challenges we are noticing, and and ask the universities, how do you think we can respond to them? And then talk with the universities instead of giving us rules to implement, which is the current system. So I don't think the government should be in the nitty-gritty of setting exams and curriculum and what else. They can say, these are the skills we want. This is the kind of person we want. And then let the schools tailor their curricula to that way. There can be peer review where schools look at which is actually the best thing, where schools and counties can look at each other's curricula, do best practices, and let the government facilitate that. And then at the higher levels, have trade organizations regulating their own professions. So you have an association of Kenyan plumbers and pipe something, and then they're the ones who set their own exams and regulate and do their peer review. And all that government will be doing is giving the guidelines of what are the basic things that must be in every professional association for them to be able to certify people in their trade. And then also have professional organizations offering their own exams, let people do entry exams into university. I think the basic idea is to facilitate people, not to streamline them. And the logic right now is streamlining instead of facilitating.
Is this the same logic you see in within the current debate over curriculum reform, especially in the primary schools? You've been quite vocal opposing it. What's your beef with it?
First of all, it's so market oriented, which is the colonial problem we inherited. That you're coming to the school and saying, this is what employers want, and we're going to educate in this way. But children are they're going to be more than employers. They're going to be citizens, they're going to be parents. They're doing more than just going to the workplace. So that's my first problem, that it's reducing our children to workers and making us train kids just for the workplace. And they'll start working when in what, another 12 years. I mean, do we have to start the workforce thing when they are 4 or 5 years old? That's the time when we should be developing their humanity, their talent, their thinking skill, their, just watching them grow and helping them grow into better human beings. But now the curriculum makes them workers. From the day they enter the school system, they are training to be workers. The other thing is that the problem with this curriculum is that it is not dealing with the social inequalities that affect education. In fact, it is making them worse. For example, they have said they want more parental involvement in the child's education. For them, from the documents I've seen, that means helping kids with their homework. So what happens when there's no parent, or a parent is working? And now, parents have to work harder to put food on the table, but they're too tired to come and do the homework. What about parents who are illiterate or sick? There are all these things that are not being considered, but now we are being told the kids their homework has to be done by the parents. And that's essentially a way of saying the system is for kids of the rich whose parents are educated. Those are the ones who will succeed in the system. There's no provision for social inequality and the way it affects education. The other evidence of that is the pathways. They are saying, I think when you're around 14, the teachers will help you decide whether you should go into STEM or humanities or arts and talent and something else. The problem is when it's the teacher who decides, other countries have shown that prejudice ends up working into that system. Because if a teacher feels they don't have time to waste on you, they'll tell you, I can't teach you this maths, go to arts and sports. And I mean, what's to prevent, for example, teachers in Rift Valley from where the runners are? What's to prevent them from saying, because you're not doing well in maths, go and be a runner? And meanwhile, they have not provided the facilities for this talent, quote unquote, pathway. There are no arts teachers because they have been fighting against the arts. There are no sports facilities. We were told about stadiums, they haven't yet come. So which arts talent are we talking about?
And how are we going to build it?
And how are we going to build it? So in the end, it's kids of the poor who will be forced into pathways with no facilities and no teachers.
Yes, but the curriculum reform itself has a history. And remember, we went fast from the 7-6-2-3 system to 8-4-4, and now there's this new one. It's always a set of numbers. But I'm curious, what do you think about the arguments that have been advanced that as the first system was too academic, the second one was producing also white-collar workers, and that we need more skills-based education. What do you think of that? Do you think that is a valid excuse for this, or a valid reason to change the systems, to play around the systems the way we're doing?
First of all, I think we are changing the system to disorient Kenyans. My theory is we are doing it after a generation. When one generation finishes in the system and now starts to ask questions about the education system, we change it. And it's a way of saying, you who are educated in this system, you cannot give back to the other generation. So now we are at a point where the 844s are starting to do very well. They are doing the tech hubs, they are getting Oscars, they're scoring goals in Europe. So they're starting to do well and starting to ask questions about where did I come from in school and how can we improve the system. Then we've changed it again. So my theory is that unless we stop this education system will be replaced in 27 years. In fact, they've kind of started saying that because they said that we have to wait until the kids in standard 3 finish through the system, then that's when we'll think again. I mean, there's been a cycle of system overhaul, and I think it's to disorient Kenyans so that there's no continuous thought, development of thought. We are losing our history this way, and people need history even within the professions because schools cannot teach everything. So the knowledge I gain from experience, I cannot pass it on because now the students in school are in a different system from what I was, and we have to start saying, well, what were you taught? Well, we have to have that conversation even before.
My point my question is really around the idea that we are educating people for academics to know stuff. etc. We've had the deputy president talk about learning about Vasco da Gama, etc., but not for practical skills that they will use on an everyday basis to get a job, etc.
Yeah.
Is there a place for education to either do both, or should it privilege educating people so that when they come out, they can be functional, they can get a job, they can do this and that?
Okay, I was getting to that. I was saying first, I think these reforms are a lie.
Right.
I don't think the reason they are giving is what they're saying.
Right.
But now coming to the idea of too academic, too exam-oriented, and too what? First of all, the 763 system was not too academic. It was for managers because when it started, the idea was to educate Kenyans who would take over from the white people in government. So that was what it was for. It was for managers. But of course, the managerial jobs did not grow as quickly. The number did not grow as quickly as the number of people entering the system. So they didn't want millions of young people saying, I was supposed to be a CS, I was supposed to be, that time it was PS or minister, where's my job? You don't want highly educated people who are not getting what you promised. So you change the system. So we go to 844, they tell us they're going to give us practical skills with which we can use when we leave. But the economy was not growing. You see, before it was government that was not growing. Now the economy was not growing. Those jobs they are telling 844s that now you can create those jobs. They couldn't. The 844s couldn't not because they didn't have the skill, by the way. It was because the economy was not growing. It was being looted. The institutions were being run down. So even if graduates wanted to be entrepreneurs, where are they going to get the credit from? Who are they going to sell to if customers are not there because they are broke? So now they've changed it again, and they're telling us, okay, now it's not that we want you to be entrepreneurs, we want companies and manufacturers to employ you. Now that's the story of why the education system is changing. But the truth is, the manufacturing sector is not growing. Manufacturers are paying crap salaries, sorry to use the word. So basically what we are being told is that when the kids get out of the system, they will go to low-paying, demeaning jobs. And because they don't have the humanistic education, we've denied it to them, they will not be able to unionize and say, we want better salaries, we want better working terms, or they won't even be able to question how is government spending their money because they haven't been given that kind of education. So actually the reforms are in line with the broken promises of the Kenyan elite. Every time a promise looks like it's failing, then we change the system again. So when this system fails in 25 years, we'll be told to change it again.
Yes, I remember that when we were introducing A44, the logic had been 7623 was too academic. And I find it quite surprising that it's the same argument being advanced now against 844. Against 844. And from what you have said and how you've articulated the colonial roots of this, does it seem not like we're going back to, again, simply creating workers? Well, we are saying that we don't want them thinking too much. So if we do create, give them academic skills, that suddenly these are not so important as much as simply getting a job.
Oh, it's so colonial. I've been saying that. It's colonial in those two areas. One, the area of saying we need workers. That is taken from the colonial handbook. Because the colonialists said, we don't want people who are thinking. Africans don't need their minds polluted by ideas. They just need to know how to work. So we are actually borrowing straight from the colonial handbook. But the other more insidious thing we have borrowed is the idea of talent. You will hear people saying some people are not gifted. That's a very dangerous argument to make. Because what will happen is that I'll carry my prejudices, for example, I'll carry them to Kwale where I used to teach. And people used to repeat these things even then, saying that there are some cultures where people are not talented or where people are not academic. You're going to start hearing more and more of that, but now the teachers have been given the license to operationalize those prejudices. So the kids of the poor and the marginalized communities are going to be told they are not academically talented.
Right.
So they're all going to be shafted into the technical jobs in the name of God and their tribe, when actually what is happening is a system discrimination. It has nothing to do with talent. It's us who are discriminating against some people.
There's something you wrote on your blog that I wanted to raise. You said, I think the greatest mistake we've made as Kenyans is to believe that everything in education can be addressed by tinkering with the system and nothing else. Yet education by its very nature is a very complex social enterprise. I think, again, the reforms have been reformed the education system. What you seem to be saying is we need much wider sets of reforms. What are these? You've mentioned a little bit about the economy affecting education. You've spoken about inequality. Could you articulate exactly, for example, social inequality, how it affects education, and why is it we can't reform the education system without thinking about the outside world, the world outside the classroom?
Yeah, because we think that people's performance in academics is affected. It's just about their working hard, about their teachers. So we think that that's the only reason, that's the only thing that affects how kids perform in school. But actually, that accounts for less than 20% of how a child performs. A child's performance is affected by, did they eat breakfast in the morning? What is the state of their family? Are they having troubles at home? How long does it take them to go to school? There are so many other factors that affect education, and we never measure them. We only look at exam results and judge the health of the system by exam results. So we need to start factoring in, we need to start considering those things when we are planning education. But the other things is what I've said, we need to diversify how we certify people and how we train them in different careers. We also need to diversify learning opportunities. We need more adult education, more museums, more cultural festivals, more community centers where a community can invite somebody to come and talk about farming, and it's for the community to listen to. We shouldn't restrict all these things to the classroom and the school system. We should have libraries, community libraries. By now, we should have a library in every county, really, and more. We should have one in every sub-county so that people can go to libraries and research, maybe use the internet to connect with people who are doing the same thing elsewhere in Kenya or elsewhere in the world. So we need to diversify the learning opportunities so that people are not depending so much on the education system for knowledge and for interaction and for learning.
So to go beyond the classroom, basically.
To go beyond the school system.
Right. Exactly. But lots of, again, the focus has been on the school system itself, and there has been lots of talk about expanding access to the school system. In 2003, we had the introduction of free primary education, which I think is the third time we are trying it. What's your thoughts on how we have done free education? Is it a good thing that is done badly, or is it a good thing that is done well? You know, or is it something that really we shouldn't be considering?
First of all, the idea of free is problematic. What we should have is universal, meaning that the systems are built with taxpayers' money. The teaching is done, I mean, the whole system is facilitated by the taxpayers, and we find also community systems of supporting local schools. But when you talk of free, what it means is that schools set the fees according to market rates and then the government pays. But that's very misleading because by scale, the government can bring down costs.
Right.
So calling it free education is already problematic because they're following the market and then the government just pays, which is, it shouldn't be. It should be that we have a budget for schools. This is what we are going to spend our money, and because of economies of scale, the costs of schools can actually be brought down. That way the government can afford to provide. But also one of the biggest problems up to today is accountability for use of resources. There's no accountability, schools don't have accountants, they don't get audited. So you're sending money and you're not sure that the money is getting to the people it's supposed to get to. And there's still also a lot of corruption, schools collecting fees, and then of course feeding the system upwards. So we are wasting a lot of money through inefficiency, but it comes from a place of where politicians are promising free education because they are saying, oh, you're worried about your children not going to school for school fees, I'll pay the school fees. They're not saying, I am going to provide the education. That's not what they are saying. They're saying I will pay the school fees. So that's why it's a farce, because they are talking about money. They're not talking about education.
Right, so the discourse of free essentially takes the focus away from the education part of it
and it goes to
the
money.
Cost and the money thing.
Yeah.
Do you think that education should be provided by the public system? And is there room and scope for having a private education system?
I think I would quote the example of Rwanda where the government provided education that was so good until the private sector can't compete. I think that's what should happen. We should have a public system that is so good that people are not forced to go to the private system because they are running away from the public system. They can go for other reasons, but not to run away. People should not be running away from public schools, which is exactly what is happening now.
Well, there's been an argument advanced, mostly by economists, that say that government should not be in the business of education, that it's not equipped to provide quality education. Do you think they're wrong?
Yes, I think they are wrong. I mean, first of all, if the government is withdrawing the funding and then the schools fall down, that's when the economists now come and tell us, look, the schools are doing badly, but they're not saying, well, how did they start doing badly? They don't talk about the corruption or the inefficiency of the system. They're only talking about the end result, because their goal is to actually pull government involvement from public education. And let me just say what has happened in this neoliberal era. What has happened is that capitalists have discovered that the biggest money is in the social services. So it's no longer making phones and selling phones or making cameras and selling cameras. They are thinking of, there's more money in health, there's no more money in education. So that is why they are campaigning so hard to defund the sector, so that because they know there's no parent who will not take their kids to school, then you have captive customers, meaning they have no choice but to come to you, as opposed to I can decide whether I want a small phone or a smartphone or a regular phone. I can make those choices, but with schools and hospitals, we have no choice. So that's what they're doing. They are capturing the social services to force people into the private provision of these services. So I don't believe that there's not enough money. There is enough, we have enough resources, and we just need political goodwill, but the politicians have been captured by the corporations. And so that's why they are repeating this lie that the problem is we don't have resources. We actually have more resources than the corporations could ever put together.
So if we do, and if we invest in publicly uh, publicly provided education, quality education, that is, should that be free, at least at the point of entry? Should it be that it is parents do not need to supplement their taxes with actual paying at schools?
I think so. I think we have lacked the imagination, and I'm sure if we have the political goodwill, a real leader can call economists and say, this is how we are earning revenue. Can you look at a way in which we can make education in a way that the parents don't have to take money out of pocket? So maybe look at the way we are spending. How are we spending our resources? This just requires goodwill and imagination, and I'm sure we can do it. And we can say we're going to do this first for primary school, make it efficient and good until we are so sure that this thing is working, and then we move to the next level. We can do it.
So what they're doing now, where FP still has problems, and they're not giving free secondary education, which might export the problems you have.
Exactly. But I think, like I was saying, when you come from the idea of money, not education, then what happens is that you're not even checking whether the schools are costed well. Are you building schools in an efficient way? For example, I know David D has said that we shouldn't pay for boarding schools. I agree, but there are some people who disagree. But I think that's a question that needs to be asked. Should government be paying for beds and breakfast? Can we have a formula, for example, where we say schools where these facilities are not available, we will make exceptions? You know, we need to think about boarding schools. We also need to think about use of land. For example, why should every school in the same area have a hockey pitch, a football pitch, and this and this and this? Why can't they share the resources? Say that all, one will have hockey, the other one will have football, the other one will have, we haven't looked at ways
in communal spaces where
have communal spaces, and even these community centers that I'm saying, like community libraries and community computer labs. Why can't the schools also share with the rest of the community instead of us spending money on laptops? For example, if we had a community lab, computer lab, where everybody comes, including kids, we say school children will come from 8 to 4, and then parents can come after that. We are not using resources effectively, and we've not asked those questions because we are using the colonial Eton model, that it must be a private school with a headmaster, teachers living within the compound. We have this colonial model that is expensive, and so we haven't looked for better ways to fund and
that's a very interesting
spend on education.
That's a very interesting model that you're proposing, where schools are no longer enclosed systems within themselves. We don't put laptops in schools, we put them so that they're available to everybody and people interact with them. This leads to a question about the involvement of academics such as yourself in the discussions about reforming our education system and how we actually envisage it to be. Do you think that we have lots of Kenyan thinkers and academics and people who experience education contributing to this effort? And if not, why not?
I don't know. I know, like, for example, when they did the reform, they had consultants. I think it's marketized. So you have people participating in it because they have signed a contract and they're getting a lot of money for that service. So I think once you commercialize those kinds of contributions, then people are in need for commercial reasons rather than for national reasons. So I would say if there are academics involved, and I think there are, it's because they're doing it on a commercial level.
As consultants.
As consultants. Personally, I think if the government was really serious about education, they should just go to the schools and universities and have a town hall and ask, so what do you people think about what's going on? And just listen. I hear Nyerere used to do that, I'm not sure, but I hear he used to regularly go and talk with people in the university and just chat. And that's what we don't have, because we come from this very managerial colonial mindset where we think if I am appointed to a position, it's because I know it all and I'm the one to commandeer everything. So there's no consultation, no bringing talent and different ideas together, no room for rigorous thinking, because actually we should have a permanent commission on the philosophy of education. Not even now resources and I don't know what, but just bringing philosophers and elders together and telling them your job is just to think about education. What do we want? What are we facing? How can we confront these things? So I think because we have a government that is our government system is from the idea of control and power, they don't consult with people who are thinking. They see thinkers as a threat.
Within the university, taking for a moment, just putting government aside,
yeah.
Are we having these sorts of debates within our academic institutions?
No.
And why?
No, actually, I'm talking more with Kenyans on social media more than my colleagues about these things. Oh God, I don't know. It's different problems. I think first of all, the exile and detention of scholars who used to think about these things intimidated academics into silence. So the message we got was just teach what is in the textbook, keep the exam and go away, you know. And then after when the Kibaki era started, that was commercialized through regulation. So now people don't want to know what we are teaching or what ideas are coming from the university. They want to know, have you done the checklist? Do your classes have chairs? Do the doors have keys? You know, that's what we are being asked as part of regulation. So I think thinking was thrown out of the university by different things. And also the propaganda, because I think it's propaganda. The propaganda of telling people your education is about the economy. So even when you try to get students to come and discuss ideas of what's happening, they're like, is this coming in the exam? If it's not, why should I come? Mm-hmm. So there are so many pressures that happened that forced thinking out of the universities. Also the idea that university management should be looking at how much money the university is making. Mm-hmm. They should follow the dictates of the market. So there are many, many reasons, but in a nutshell, the kind of thinking we need is not happening within the university corridors.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I really have to get this in. The world around us is changing. The technology is changing a lot of what were formerly perceived to be jobs that people could train for and get for life. And I know you've argued that we shouldn't be taking education simply as something that trains for jobs. But how do we actually start preparing our citizens and our youth and our kids for the changes that are happening, that we're living through, given that lots of us don't really know what the world will look like, 20 years, 10 years from now?
Okay, I hope I'll be able to say this briefly. I think a good education is an education that teaches people to, one, analyze what is happening around them, and two, adapt to the changes. So whatever curriculum you give them, be it in STEM or the arts or business, they have to be able to come out of the system with those two skills, being able to analyze and being able to adapt. That is what is being removed. And instead, we are telling people, right now, these are the skills that you need. But in 20 years, we don't know whether those are the technical skills that people are able to, whether they will use those things. So it's very misguided and misleading for people to say we are training students today for the jobs tomorrow. Nobody can do that. But you can give people the skills to be able to say, this is what is happening, this is how I adapt to it. I never learned with computers. You know, I started using computers, I think, when I was masters. So how is it that I am able to now even do social media? You know, it's because I have the skills for thinking and adapting. And by the way, actually, it's my students who introduced me to social media, because they said, if you want to be a cool teacher and to know what we are doing, join social media. So you see, that ability to be able to say, I'm not so proud that I cannot learn from my students. I am open enough to be able to see what is happening and adapt to it. That's what we need in the education system, no matter what content you're teaching. And that is what is being thrown out of the education system. Like right now, I'm teaching a course on social media, by the way. And I just started it this semester. And that's because under the liberal arts system, you're allowed to create a new curriculum as a course only and teach it. So that's what I am doing. But what the commission would prefer is that I write the curriculum, take it through the department, take it through the Senate, take it to the commission, they approve. And by the time the curriculum comes back, first of all, you haven't been able to get feedback from your students to hear, is this curriculum working or not? But also it's outdated. So you have documents sitting at the commission waiting for approval. By the time you get it, you now need to revise the curriculum again. So we need a system that is flexible, that allows people to innovate within the system. But it's because we have demonized teachers so much that we are not allowing teachers to innovate within the classroom.
Which I think kind of brings us a full circle to what you had said at the beginning about people wanting different things, or using the same language to discuss reform, but actually meaning different things. As a final thought, when parents are entrusting their kids to the system and thinking that they're being prepared for the 21st century, and what you're saying is they're being prepared for what's happening now, which would happen necessarily next. What recourse do parents have? What is it that they should focus on? Should they be engaging on the debate on curriculum reform? Or should they be saying that the problem is something else that they need to deal with at another level? What would be your kind of parting shot and advice to them? And if you're willing to perhaps also tell them, when they look at the 844 system that's now changing into this, and they're seeing all the different curricula that are present within the different schooling systems that are available here in Kenya. Is there any you would recommend, or would you say that's actually not the problem, it's something else?
That's a hard question. Actually, the problem with education is that it's so multifaceted. It's very hard to give a straight formula. I think for parents, and I'm so sad to say this because this is something that is not accessible to most Kenyan parents, but I think diversify your child's learning. Don't be so restricted to the school system. You know, we need community libraries so that parents don't have the pressure of having to buy books for their children. If there are libraries, the kids can go and borrow other books and bring them home and read and then return them. So we need a diversity of opportunities for learning. Take them to cultural festivals, like, there are some storytelling festivals which are awesome. Just have a variety of learning opportunities and don't depend so much on the school system. The problem is that is a resource that is available to so few parents. And I would say devolution should put money in community centers, libraries, playing fields, all these cultural things that can cushion parents so that it's not between them or the school system. Because a lot of the stuff I talk about is very technical. It's not accessible even to an educated parent. So even if I'm telling a parent, oh, this curriculum is not good, it's problematic for this, there's really nothing they can do, and they're not a trained professional to know what the problem is. So they can start by asking their MCAs and their governors for more diverse opportunities for learning. Libraries, cultural festivals, places to play and have their youth come and perform, or people come and tell stories. Different things. Have museums where they can put the artifacts from their grandparents. I'm sure people have artifacts in their homes. Why can't we all put them together in one county, and the kids can come and see different things from their communities and different histories? So this is what I would say parents should ask for, because focusing on the school is exactly where the politicians want us, because it means they control the conversation. But if we have all these different spaces for learning, then parents don't have to be sort of imprisoned in the school system. Because right now I think the school system is it's imprisoning society. We need to open it up so that the world becomes the classroom, not just the school building.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great place to end it. I'm afraid we've completely run out of time. I'd like to thank Dr. Wandia Njoya for joining us here at The Elephant. And we'll see you next time.